A native of Northern Ireland, Mairead Lavery has a degree in management and accounting from Queen's University Belfast, and she's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Ireland. She joined Export Development Canada in 2014, and 2 years ago this month, she became the first woman to occupy EDC's chief executive role in its 75-plus year history. Mairead Lavery has put values and ethics at the center of her leadership approach, and under her direction, EDC has achieved unprecedented growth and is helping Canadian companies do business in 200 markets around the world while generating over $100 billion in trade and investment annually. In 2020, EDC became a major contributor to the federal government's COVID-19 economic response, helping deliver billions of dollars in liquidity to companies across Canada. Mairead, we're delighted to have you as part of Canada 360.
Thank you, Perrin. Delighted to be here.
Well, EDC is playing a vital role in supporting Canadian businesses throughout the pandemic, and it'll be a key player as we transition to a business-led recovery. From your perspective, what role is international trade playing in Canada's economic recovery?
Thanks, Perrin. I think it's just such an imperative, international trade. And it's interesting, we were just chatting about that today. Now, international trade statistics come out at the same time as labour statistics in Canada. Actually, we're expecting them this week. And what we see is people don't necessarily focus on international trade. They're still very Canada-centric focused. So the labour statistics would be the most exciting statistic in Canada. But for us, it is about trade. When we're forecasting a 4.4% increase in Canadian GDP in 2021, followed by a 4% in 2022. So those are quite significant increases in Canadian GDP. And if you look behind that, trade is just such a driver. So we're forecasting a 9% increase in goods exports and a 7% increase in services exports. And that gives you a sense of just how much bigger trade is in increasing and its contribution to Canadian GDP. So we are very robust. Certainly at EDC, we're turning our mind to recovery. And as much as we are still very focused on supporting our smaller businesses through some of the COVID programming of the government, we need to turn our mind to recovery to try and help open up opportunities and help others see opportunities that international trade can bring. And what an interesting time for international trade. Certainly that's what our customers tell us. It's a big mix of large opportunities and some really big headwinds.
Let's take a look at those big opportunities and headwinds. Obviously, the pandemic impact has been very unequal across sectors. What sectors and industries do you see as being poised for growth in 2021 and beyond? And which ones do you see facing significant headwinds?
So Perrin, I think it really, we've been talking about the K-shaped recovery for a while, and we see exactly the same thing. The industries that are challenged continue to be our tourism and hospitality sectors, aviation, energy less so now that we see the oil price increasing, but energy has been really difficult to forecast in 2020 given the fluctuations in availability of oil and oil price consequently. So those continue to be the very challenged sectors. In terms of opportunities and the sectors that are winning, anything related to technology really growing very fast. We see clean technology increasing in particular as I think the climate debate has really accelerated during 2020. Agrifood, as countries continue to think about how to stabilize their food sources and where they're going to obtain those sources from. So we see agri-food. And we also see manufacturing. Our automotive sector is doing extremely well in Canada, but I think we'll see that pivoting. We already hear, electrical vehicles much, much more. So we'll see a different type of manufacturing. I think we'll see a very high-tech manufacturing. So we'll see that. And probably the most surprising of 2020 and going into 2021 is forestry, wood products, furniture, all those sectors that are relying on natural resources have been doing well. And I would say continuing along, one of Canada's very biggest natural resource sectors has been mining, which hasn't been on the downside, probably not as much upside, but very consistent performer and will continue to be in 2021.
When you mentioned agri-food, I was stunned by the figures we were seeing in terms of sales of canola, and that our producers can't keep up with the volumes that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we're going to see more of that, Perrin. I mean, there's just such, the economic statistics are there, and there's just such a growth continuing in Asia on the middle class, the conversion, I would say, to protein and what the sources of protein are. And then Canada just has not only, of course, the land mass to actually produce that and the climate to produce that food needs, but we have such a history of innovation in the agricultural sector. I mean, Canada's always been a world leader in the production of agricultural equipment, and being an exporter, a very large exporter of this agricultural equipment. Now we see that converting into agricultural technology and the ability to actually be much more efficient and reduce the GHG emissions linked to agricultural production. So I see lots of opportunities in this space, and canola is but one. We certainly see it with pulses, and again, the demand for protein, and of course the demand for meat products. I think the question going into the future will be, how do we balance that with GHG emissions?
Yes. You mentioned a little bit earlier the importance of tech, and that
Mm.
tech industries in Canada were doing well. One of the impacts of COVID has been that it's accelerated several long-term structural trends that were already affecting global trade, including the shift of economic activity online. In your opinion, have Canadian exporters sufficiently embraced technology? And why is technological adaptation more important than ever?
Well, that's a mixed answer, Perrin. Some of our companies and our exporters absolutely have embraced technology, and there's many different ways to embrace technology, whether it's in your own production, whether it's in your logistics change, or whether it's in your customers and actually end product, getting the last mile and getting your product to the consumer. So it's very, very different. So we absolutely have seen companies that were going through digital transformations that were starting to invest. And equally, particularly when I talk to smaller customers, they understand the need for technology, but they didn't have the funds to invest. They didn't have the resources, both human and financial, to invest in technology. And certainly, when going through a crisis, those were the companies that were impacted the most. So any company that had invested in e-commerce, any company that had invested in remote sensing, robotics, artificial intelligence, really, whilst impacted, of course, was much easier to turn around when the crisis hit. I think the challenge is making sure that companies understood that right throughout their supply chain. So supply chain dynamics have also added something into it. So I would say, Perrin, it depends on the sector that you're in. Some sectors have done really well. Like we do see a lot of an increase in non-store retail. So that has done really well. But equally, we see actually within a sector, depending on the size of the company, depending just on their own investment thesis, how different it can actually be. And it's just so important. The imperative for technology is there, Perrin. We are such a small population. Going into COVID, we were struggling with labor to actually build up our GDP. And of course, that depends on labor, it depends on productivity. Those are two of the absolute key levers. And without labor, the only place for Canada to turn is to technology. Now, of course, we'll have to deal with the displacement effect of technology and build in retraining for the labor force that we have. But that's a way Canada can actually scale. By bringing technology in, it can actually meet the scale that will be demanded of it to supply Asia and to supply other really interesting markets around the world. So I would say it's an absolute imperative, and then can't go without mentioning climate and just how that's accelerated in 2020. So what I'm seeing and hearing from international customers that are buying Canadian goods, it's a key desire to have clean technology, water, emissions, anything they can do to make their processes more efficient and reduce their carbon footprint. That's what people are looking for around the world.
And that's a great opportunity for Canada. At the present time, governments are very focused on the immediate. How do they contain the spread of COVID? But business doesn't have that luxury. We need to look forward as to what will the environment look like when we come out of the other end of the tunnel. You mentioned digital, and technology and green technologies as key areas, but what other areas do you see as the main issues that Canadian businesses should be focused on right now as they chart their path to recovery?
Well, Perrin, there's some very immediate issues that will be front and foremost in people's minds and business minds, and that includes their financing and their financing needs and ensuring they have the right capital to see through the crisis. So it doesn't get any more immediate than that. I would say second is keeping their employees and their customers safe, and the third is the uncertainty linked to restrictions. So whether that's provincial restriction rules and the differences across the provinces with that, or whether it's actually travel and what does this actually mean for their business. So there's a really short-term impact and issues that companies are dealing with. And then there's what I see as much more the strategic issues that they will be dealing with. Absolutely technology, absolutely climate change. And then I would say trade uncertainty, protectionism, supply chains. Buy America is something that customers are asking us about a lot. And what does that mean? So just the evolving trade environment and how that will unfold is really the questions that the more strategic questions that exporters are asking today.
It's a long list of issues, and it's
It
one that's
is a
urgent
long.
for business to address right now.
Well, and I think, Perrin, there's lots of opportunities as well. So just maybe a quick plug. There is no better time to continue diversification. We've been talking about this for a long time. And unfortunately, it takes crises to get Canadian companies to really reflect on diversification. So let's keep pushing that message. And last but not least, I'm hearing from companies, there's lots of acquisition opportunities out there. And if that means taking their supply chains and bringing the benefit of that back into local markets, I think there's lots of opportunities for Canadian companies. So hopefully we can focus on that as well.
A good and an optimistic note to end it on. Mairead, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for all the support that you and EDC give to Canadian business.
Thank you so much, Perrin, for the opportunity.